Press. Press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys.
Come on, guys. Let's go. Let's go.
Thank you, press.
Let's go.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you.
Did you underestimate Ukraine? President Putin, will you stop killing civilians? President Putin, how can the U.S. trust your words?
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go.
The presidential planes are already approaching Anchorage, and thanks to global agencies, we can watch a live broadcast of what is happening near the Elmendorf-Richardson Joint Base, where the president's meeting is scheduled to take place. Since early morning, Alaska time, representatives of leading global media have been gathering there, of course, to cover this crucially important summit. As you can see, several television platforms have already been set up there, reporting all the most important developments to their viewers. Our TSN correspondent, Olya Koshelenko, is also working in Alaska. We've already spoken with her during this broadcast, and now we're bringing her in again, along with our own correspondent in the EU, Natalia Fibrik, with whom I'll also be speaking. Olya, first to you, I have this question. Alaska, Jan, Kirillo, in general, these are places that aren't used to such high-profile global events, to this kind of powerful international diplomacy. How is all of this happening there, especially considering that Alaska, although calm, is still confidently considered a pro-Trump state in terms of political views, one that has supported the current president for a long time?
Yes, Olga, Anchorage is the largest city in Alaska, but even so, it's still not big enough to accommodate and host everyone who wants to cover, participate in, and organize this large-scale summit. First and foremost, it's a tourist destination, very beautiful, but Putin is unlikely to see any of this beauty as he will be staying on the grounds of a military base where the negotiations will take place. Let me say a bit about the atmosphere. Hotel rooms, car rentals. They ran out almost immediately as soon as it became known that the venue would be Alaska, because right away journalists, before Anchorage was even confirmed, started speculating about the exact location, and this was the most likely one. So in other words, many people booked at their own risk, and it turned out that they chose the right place. But those who were late had to settle for whatever corners they could find just to stay here. The Russian propagandists are living on the grounds of the hockey arena, in partitioned areas with beds and organized meals. By the way, they themselves shared this video, but they're kept together like this because, well, they move around under supervision as a single group. All the other normal people are staying separately. Of course, the delegations had to spread out across the city and even into neighboring small towns. Because just imagine, these are delegations, these are security services. There are journalists, a huge number of journalists from all over the world, and everyone has to work here today somehow. The negotiations are scheduled to begin at 10:30 p.m. Kyiv time. Trump will meet Putin by the plane. First, there will be a one-on-one conversation with only interpreters present, and then a broader meeting with the delegations. A business lunch and a joint press conference are also expected. Let me say a bit more about the press conference. In American diplomatic tradition, this is considered a sign of respect for the guest because it is believed that if presidents appear before the press together, they share certain common values. And supposedly they have something to say together. Well, we'll see how it goes. Local residents will try to spoil Putin's mood a bit. Yesterday, we were already at their protest and it made an incredible impression on me. Both the number of people and the scale of the event impressed me because the town is small, as I mentioned, but there were a lot of people and most of them were Americans. I expected there would be many from the Ukrainian community, but I only met 2 women from Ukraine who have also been living here for 20 years. But the local residents overall are not happy to welcome a war criminal into their home. They say that, first of all, there is no place for Putin in Alaska because this is a free country and he is an international criminal. They do not want their home to also be a place for a war criminal. And they do not believe in negotiations, saying that if Ukraine is not at the negotiating table, then it means nothing significant. No agreement can be reached and it is unlikely that any decisions will be made. And today people are also planning to hold several more protest actions throughout the city. Of course, it is unlikely that Putin will see them because obviously he will either be quickly driven through in a motorcade or taken by other routes. Nevertheless, they consider it their duty. An honor, after all, to come out and speak up, to express their opinion. And it seems that today Ukraine will be watching because this is an extremely important event for us and it will be a sleepless night. But what about Europe, Natalia? Are European politicians and Euro officials also planning to stay up with us and wait to see how these negotiations will end? Tonight?
Yes, hello, Olya. Well, of course, the focus of attention in Europe is just as strong. A lot of journalists have gone to cover this summit. And in principle, it should be said that this week, Europe has become very active externally and politically. Yes, they were not able to achieve a change in the negotiation format to bring Volodymyr Zelensky to the negotiating table so that they themselves could sit down at the table. However, the Europeans were able to quickly agree on a common position. The European Union, the European Commission, NATO, the United Kingdom, together with Volodymyr Zelensky, who this week was here in Berlin and then in London. And together they conveyed this position and these principles to Donald Trump. This foreign policy initiative belongs to the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz. And it must be said, this is an advantage that sets him apart from his predecessor. And today, just before the negotiations in Alaska, Merz once again emphasized that today Moscow has the opportunity to agree to a ceasefire. The goal should be a summit with the participation of President Zelensky, at which a ceasefire agreement will be reached. A ceasefire. Ukraine needs strong security guarantees. Territorial issues can only be resolved with the consent of the Ukrainian people, Merz stated. And he says that we clearly and jointly conveyed these points to President Trump. So those are the statements, and indeed the entire focus is absolutely on this summit. And in fact, French President Emmanuel Macron has already agreed to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky immediately after this summit. So we will be watching from here as well.
Because we'll be hearing from someone again more than once. In today's broadcast, special correspondents for TSN, Olya Koshelenko in the USA and Natalia Fibrik in Germany, discuss the upcoming talks between Trump and Putin, and in particular how Europe will be watching these negotiations and with what thoughts. Will peace come after Alaska? During his meeting with Vladimir Putin, the US president hopes to reach an agreement on a ceasefire in Ukraine and only then proceed to further negotiations regarding a peace agreement. The last American president to meet with Putin was Joe Biden. That was 4 years ago, when Russia was already under sanctions for the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, but was still only preparing its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. At that time, by the way, the American leader was criticized for that meeting. In total, during his time in power, Putin has met with 5 American presidents, and now he will have at least a 6th meeting with Donald Trump. What were the previous meetings like? What made them memorable? And how did the disclosure of certain details about meetings with Putin anger Trump? TSN correspondent Katerina Fedorchenko will tell you more.
July 2017, half a year after Trump took his first oath as president, he heads to Hamburg for the G20 summit, where he is set to meet with Putin. Before this, they had only spoken on the phone and exchanged compliments in absentia. They had exchanged compliments, criticized each other, and gone through the scandal over suspicions of Moscow's interference in the American elections through Russian hackers. At first, there was a brief meeting in the corridors. They shake hands and Trump pats Putin on the back. Soon after, the negotiations begin. For 2 hours, they mostly discussed the possible interference of Moscow in the American elections. Hackers linked to Russia are accused of breaking into the Democrats' computer networks and publishing information from them to discredit Trump's rival, Hillary Clinton. At the same time, thousands of fake accounts appeared on American social networks, spreading disinformation in favor of Trump. After the meeting, he states that Putin assured him he did not interfere in the elections, and he believes him. On that very same day, they meet again at a formal dinner. Trump approaches Putin and they talk for another hour, despite all protocols and with only a Russian interpreter present. The details of that conversation remain unknown to this day. November 2017, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Vietnam. In the United States, Special Counsel Mueller's investigation is gaining momentum, having brought charges against Trump's former campaign manager and Yanukovych's ex-PR man Paul Manafort. Against the backdrop of these accusations, the U.S. Congress reminds Moscow of the annexation of Crimea, human rights violations, and cyber threats, and strengthens sanctions with a special law. Trump is forced to sign it. In response, Moscow expels American diplomats. Amid all these circumstances, no official meeting is planned in Vietnam. They talk on the sidelines and even make a joint statement on the Syrian issue, with Washington and Moscow calling for de-escalation. July 2018, Helsinki. Relations between the US and Russia remain tense. The US Congress tightened sanctions policy due to the scandal over the poisoning of former intelligence officer Skripal in Salisbury, UK, after which the West coordinates the expulsion of Russian diplomats. But a meeting between Putin and Trump is still being planned. And here is how preparations for it were made, recalls former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton, who traveled to Moscow to coordinate the details.
I briefed Trump during preparations for many meetings in 2018 when we were flying to Finland for the last summit with Putin. I briefed him on the negotiations regarding strategic nuclear weapons while we were both watching the match of the FIFA World Cup on his television.
In Helsinki, they again discussed Russia's interference in the American elections, as well as Ukraine, Syria, and the construction of the Nord Stream gas pipeline. Afterwards, they appear before the press together. Putin talks about Crimea.
President Trump's position on Crimea is well known, and he adheres to it. He speaks about the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. We have a different point of view. We believe that we held the referendum in strict accordance with international law and the UN Charter. For us, this issue is closed.
Donald Trump talks about Moscow's interference in the American elections. More precisely, he publicly rejects the conclusions of his own American intelligence in favor of the KGB man Putin.
President Putin denied everything very convincingly and reasonably. If there were any evidence, it would have already been shown to everyone.
After this, the American president is met with protests at home. And he is criticized not only by his Democratic rivals, but also by supporters of his own Republican Party. A few months later, in November 2018, Trump will no longer shake Putin's hand. At the G20 summit in Argentina, the American president avoids the Russian president. The bilateral talks are cancelled because at that time Russia had just captured Ukrainian sailors in the Kerch Strait. But even in this situation, Trump doesn't really criticize Moscow. At most, he calls its actions unacceptable. The last time they met was in the summer of 2019 on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan. They had only 80 minutes. What stood out the most was the manner of communication during the protocol part of the meeting. With a smile, Trump asks Putin not to interfere in the upcoming American elections. The Kremlin dictator smiles as well. After this meeting, journalists would write about the contrast between the problems in relations between Washington and Moscow and Trump's considerable fondness for personal communication with Putin and, according to the American president, good relations with him.
Everything depends on his personal relationships with other heads of state. Trump himself has publicly stated this. Of course, personal relationships matter in foreign policy just as they do in everything else. But when you are one of the toughest leaders in the world like Vladimir Putin, it's not a matter of emotions but of cold calculation. Trump does not understand this.
John Bolton, with whom Trump consulted a lot during his first term, now irritates the American president. In the days leading up to the meeting in Alaska, Bolton gave several comments regarding Trump's communication with Putin, which made the White House host wonder why he is being quoted. And he calls his former advisor stupid and a fired loser, as if confirming Bolton's words that for Trump, politics is personal. Katerina Fedorshenko, TSN 1 Plus, Marathon United News.